great. Well, thanks so much for having me. I'm going to start a timer so I can try to stay on time here. And I'm going to talk a little bit today about talking with children, especially children under the age of 18, about Lynch syndrome, especially even starting with diagnosis. Are there circumstances where we might want to test children under the age of 18 for Lynch syndrome? What are some of the considerations when thinking about that as a family? And then we'll end but with a couple of recommendations on how to talk with children about Lynch syndrome. For example, if you're an adult who's been diagnosed, how do you convey that information to children in your family? So this idea of testing, as some of you may know, we typically start testing around the ages of 18 to 20. And one of the reasons for that is because that's when some of the preventive and screening strategies typically start. But there are some exceptions to this, and I've listed those here. So if there are some early cancers earlier than age 18, for example, in the family, this might be one reason to test children in the family at a younger age, or if both biological parents have Lynch syndrome. A couple of things to think about if you or someone who you know are considering testing for children who are under the age of 18. There are guidelines out there that say that typically we don't test children before they're the age of 18 in general, not just for Lynch syndrome, but in general. And the reasons are listed here in the second bullet, that we want to give children a chance to make their own decisions. We also want them to be as equipped as possible to cope with the test result, whether it be positive or negative. And so that's why typically testing is deferred till later in life. But as I alluded to in this first bullet, there are a lot of gray areas here. And so testing sometimes does happen before the age of 18. So I think as a family member, as a parent, it's really important to clarify for yourself and maybe in discussion with your other family members, why do you want testing for your child? Maybe the reasons, pros and cons, and to start that conversation early on with your medical team. Ideally including a genetic counselor, perhaps a behavioral health provider. And for if you have teens in your life who are considering testing, giving your adolescents or teens time to talk with those genetic counselors or other team members separate from you as the adult, so that they can have a chance to ask questions and have some privacy around that too, which can be really helpful. A few things that we typically try to explore with families when they're considering testing children who are younger than the age of 18 is what might be the mental health impact of learning these test results. Might children worry more or less? And same for family members. That's just one example. Another piece is trying to think about how these test results might fit with what's happening for the child now, and also what a family might be expecting from that child for the future. Sometimes families sort of have ideas or narratives in their mind of what this child is destined to do or not to do, and testing can fit into that. And so that's an important thing to sort of think through beforehand. Similarly with this third bullet, what might those test results do for that child now in the present, and then also in the next 5 years and then later in their life too. Here in Utah and in other areas of the country, we have families, for example, where a child is getting ready to serve their mission. And so it's actually quite important for them potentially to learn their Lynch syndrome testing results so they can plan to be close to a medical facility. That might be the same if they're planning a place where they're going to go to college or other life choices. Family planning sometimes comes into play. So there can be a lot of scenarios. And I think our general recommendation for families is that these are very real, they're important considerations, and we hope that people will feel comfortable raising them with their providers for discussion. Now, how do you talk with children about Lynch syndrome? I think this is a question that we get a lot on our team. So we wanted to give a few general guidelines, and then I have some specifics too on how you can basically, what words you can use in talking with children. I think the first thing is that you know your child best. So you know your child or your children's maturity levels, their tendency to worry, maybe other stressors going on. Like right now, we're certainly all dealing with COVID as a stressor. And so as you're thinking about whether and how to talk about Lynch syndrome, I think it's helpful to talk with professionals or other trusted people in your life or through some of the professional organizations mentioned earlier. And then picking a time that feels right for you, I think is really important. One thing that we often stress is this is not an emergency that it has to be disclosed the day after the test result is given to the adult. One thing we usually encourage adults to do is really work through their own initial reactions of receiving their Lynch syndrome test result, whether positive or negative, before they start broaching that with their children. And then thinking about when you are going to tell children where you're going to have that conversation. So everywhere from, is this going to be in the family living room, maybe during a family meeting? Is it going to be in the car on the way somewhere? Some people tell us they actually love having conversations with their children in the car. There's sort of a defined end, but also you're sort of next to each other, but you don't have to be facing each other talking. So there's some benefits there. And who should be there? For example, if you have multiple children of different ages, how do you want to broach that? I think typically one thing that can be helpful with kids of a variety of ages is to start the conversation with everyone as a group, but then to follow up with each child separately because they might need some different explanations or reassurance depending on their ages. When to have that conversation. And as an adult, I think sometimes practicing what that script can sound like, what the actual words are that we're going to say, can be really helpful. So here are a couple of suggestions for ways to do this. These words might not fit well for you, but just some ideas are basically what you see in italics under each bullet. So, you want to open up the conversation in some way, something related to health. I want to talk to you about something related to health. And then what can be really helpful is grounding the conversation in something that the child is aware of already, or trying to understand what they are aware of. So, for example, they might know that Aunt Sarah had to go to the hospital when she had colon cancer or when she was sick. And so you can sort of start the conversation that way. And then what you want to do is be pretty direct about explaining what your Lynch syndrome test result is, and then give them the information they need at that time, which oftentimes when it comes to children and even teenagers is not all the information that we have as adults. And so something as simple as, I got a test at the doctor's office too that told me that I have a change in my genes that makes it easier for me to get cancer too. And then I think a really key step after that is reassuring children that, you, if this is appropriate, are healthy right now, and that basically what you're doing is preventive care. So you're trying to keep yourself healthy, you're going to go for extra checkups, and that by doing this, I'm going to try to stay healthy for as long as possible. The next bullet is really sort of giving the sense of efficacy to children and to others in the family that, yes, like this is happening, but there are things that we can all do together, for example, to maintain our health. So everything from like being physically active to eating healthy foods to getting enough sleep. These are great health habits for everyone to do, especially for children to do from a young age. So really emphasizing that like there's something that we can do together and that you can do to support me. And then being prepared for the range of reactions from children, knowing that they take their cues from you and what they know of your family history. And watch out for this idea of magical thinking that we usually see in younger children, maybe like elementary school and younger, that children oftentimes think they have more control in the world than they do. And so they might think, oh, like mom got this test result because last week I made her really angry by doing this thing. And so sometimes that is said from them and sometimes that is not said immediately, but you might just want to watch out for that and explain that that is not the case. Children will have a range of responses to hearing this information, everything from looking like they are spacing out and not listening to you, to maybe being very upset, to just absorbing it and sort of going on with their day. And it's surprising their reaction. So just acknowledge any response they have and just be open to the fact that they will probably request or need additional conversations over time. Those questions may come over time. And I think it's okay if you don't have an answer to a question. You can say, that's a great question. I'm going to work on finding the answer for you and get back to them. I put on here the email address for our group at the Huntsman Cancer Institute. If you don't have your own genetic counselor, you're always welcome to get a hold of us through this email address. Know that as children get older, you're going to have this discussion with them. They're going to understand things differently. They'll have new questions. And this is a great time as your children continue to develop and get older to talk with your medical team about how those conversations are going. Is there anything new that you could be bringing into the conversation? And that's what we're all here for. There's a new book that recently came out that we all found out about that's listed here. We haven't had a chance to review it yet as a team, but this is a book that's geared towards families and younger children, so we wanted to make sure to share that title with you all. So in conclusion, I just wanted to, some key takeaways. So we typically do testing for Lynch syndrome at the age of 18 or older, but there are some possibilities of testing children younger, and here you just want to think about what the potential impact might be on children, then talk with your team about that. When you're talking about Lynch syndrome with minor children, you as the adult, you want to feel ready and prepared for it. You want to try to ground that discussion in what they know, give them the information they need, which is oftentimes less than the information that's floating around in our heads. They will always ask for more if they want to know more. And then be prepared for those questions over time. That might crop up randomly during dinner 3 weeks down the road or another time. And then make sure to seek support for yourself from your medical team or others who can help you in that process. Thank you. Feel free to be in touch with me via email if anything comes up for you in the future. And I'm happy to take questions or however Whitney wants to handle it.